Good afternoon to our viewers in Germany and good morning to our viewers in the United States. Hello, I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's Kaffeepause. Each week, we check in with a journalist based in Germany to talk about the news stories behind the headlines. And today, I'm delighted to welcome Malte Lehming from the Berlin daily Der Tagesspiegel. Malte, herzlich willkommen. It is always great to see you.
Thank you for having me, and good morning to New York. And it's good to be here.
Well, it's always good to talk to you, and in our Kaffeepause events, you've sort of started a tradition of sharing some of the headlines, and so I thought I'd ask you what's making the front pages today or over the weekend.
Yes, let me see. I've got some of the pages in here. This is the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung from the Sunday edition. The headline is a little bit hard to read. It's this: So schrecken wir Russland nicht ab. That is not how we can deter Russia. So this is about Ukraine conflict, Germany's role in it, and so on. The Süddeutsche Zeitung, Sunday's edition. This is, let me check. Die Union dupiert die Ampel, meaning the union dupes the traffic light coalition. This is about working together between the government and the opposition with the budget, for example, and these things. And this is Berliner Morgenpost, our main competitor in Berlin. 150,000 demonstrated against right-wing extremism in Berlin. It's just in Berlin. The German figures are much more. And then I have something left from today's Berliner Morgenpost, what I found is quite interesting. It says, descendants of resistance fighters warn against AfD, against the right-wing extremism. And this, I think, is an important development because the AfD, the right-wing extremists, they try to conquer the tradition of the German resistance movement by saying we are fighting for the holy Germany. That were the famous last words of Stauffenberg before he was killed. And they always lay down on July 20th, which is the assassination day from Stauffenberg to Hitler. So this now gives a strong signal to these attempts to conquer a very important date in German history. And I think this is a news that might be not on the front page in tomorrow's edition in newspapers, but what I think is a really important development.
So, Malte, already you've touched on a number of different topics that I'd like to sort of circle back to in our conversation today. But let's start with what you were talking about toward the end there of this warning against the AfD and the Berliner Morgenpost headline yesterday that 100,000 people took to the streets to protest against the AfD. I heard in some radio reporting this morning that nationwide, the initial estimates are that it was over 500,000 people who participated in different demonstrations, but that not all the numbers are in yet, and that number could go up quite a bit. And if I remember correctly, this is the fourth weekend in a row that there have been these kinds of protests where people have taken to the streets to say that the AfD does not speak for them. Can you talk a little bit about these protests against the far right?
Yes, I think it is a very, very big movement starting then and all over Germany, from the south to the north, the west. East is another topic because in some parts of the east it is even dangerous to protest against the AfD because members or sympathizers with the AfD are the majority of some towns in the east. So all the more you have to applaud these people for their courage to show up on the streets. It started after a so-called secret meeting in a Hotel Adlon place in Brandenburg was reported upon, where right-wing extremists and neo-Nazis and members of the AfD met in a so-called secret meeting. I don't know how secret it was, but it was taped and then recorded upon that they made plans for for expelling foreigners. The term, the euphemism that they take for it, it's remigration. And so how to remigrate 100,000 people from Germany to expel them, and not just people with no asylum seeking rights, but foreigners in general. I think that brought the whole anti-AfD or anti-right-wing extremism mood to a boiling point and brought a lot of people to the streets. I don't see in it much more than a strong, but this is valuable, not much more than a strong sign of solidarity with people living in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And we just had in the parliament the Ampel coalition, red, green, and yellow. They decided upon two new laws. One is to make it easier to expel asylum seekers with no right to asylum, but the other is to make it easier to give them nationality, even dual nationality. So they try to please the right as well as the left tolerant left, how you would call it. So the topic is, I would say, is right now still the most important topic in Germany. And given the numbers, it's the biggest political movement, at least since the peaceful demonstrations in the former GDR, I think in autumn '89, when I think maybe 1 million people on one weekend came to the street as well. But this is now, as you said, the fourth week, and it's more than 1 million people nationwide. This is really huge.
Mm-hmm. Um, in terms of the migration issue, how much of a topic is that is really making headlines and that people are following closely?
I think very much so. Migration, immigration, asylum policy is still, maybe it's the number one policy topic because it's so polarizing. I mean, the whole popularity of the AfD, the right wing extremism, it stems at least in a very much part from this topic. So the so-called traditional parties try to find a way to tackle the topic without pleasing the right wingers. And for example, the last general debate, it was Friedrich Merz, the opposition leader, who took the chancellor Olaf Scholz to responsibility. Say it is the consequence of your policy that makes people frustrated, and that's why they vote for the AfD. In terms, the social democrats and Greens are blaming the conservatives
Mm-hmm.
for making the problem worse because they are so close to the AfD with their anti-foreigner sentiments and so on and so on. So it has everything that policy debates has to, because both sides are blaming each other for something that they both despise. So it's still isolated. The AfD is still politically isolated, and even more so when you see every weekend 1 million people on the streets saying you are isolated.
Politically isolated and yet doing incredibly well in the polls, particularly in the East. And so as a longtime observer of German politics, the question I would have for you is how much do you think that the polling numbers are just people sort of demonstrating their dissatisfaction with the current government in polls, but that they might do something different on election day? Or are you concerned that the polling numbers are actually an accurate reflection of how people would vote if there was an election today?
That is, I think, always the big question in front of before any kind of election. How reliable are the poll numbers? I think the polling institutes became very reliable, and they learned from the mistakes that they made by underestimating the right wing voices, sometimes overestimating them, that then they adjusted their methods and so on and so on. I think it's a really reality figures that they were shown. And for example, in Turing, one of the 16 states, one of five states in the former East, the AfD came to 31%, but a new party surrounding Sarah Wagenknecht, came to 17%. With 48% together, they could even, in some cases, form a government. So the threat is there. The threat is real. The first test we have is the election campaign for the European Union. I'm very much afraid that right-wing parties all over Europe will get new voices and new people who vote for them. So the next test, I think the three most important elections are in September. This is Brandenburg, Thüringen, and Sachsen. And it could very well be. I mean, it's the question that nobody really can convincingly answer is why in the East? Why are they making such a strong shows in the East? Since I would argue that basically the East is not so much worse off than the West is. They have the same part of unemployment. The economy is driving very good. Some very, very multinational companies are settling in the East. Tesla, for example, which we have in front of the door in Brandenburg, and so on and so on. So why does people make them right-wing extremists? I think this is something to do with a certain kind of tradition to if you vote, let's say, if you make a strong statement, you can force the West to do more for us. And the strong statement is, for example, after unification, the one of the paroles was in German, it's something like, if the D-Mark comes not here, we go to the West. So if the German marks is not coming to the East, we go to the West and transfer our people to the West. So it's kind of, it's a kind of way to show political, to show a political state, make a political statement. The more aggressive you are, they have a long tradition of voting for the left party. The socialist left party, I'm not talking about the Social Democratic Party, but the socialist left party, which evolved from the SED, they renamed themselves a lot of times, but because that was a shocking vote as well, and they tried to force Westerners to pay attention and to pay more attention to the East. So this is my personal explanation for this. Other people have more explanations.
So I'd like to come back to the political landscape in some of these new parties in just a moment. But before we do that, you had mentioned this meeting that took place just outside of Potsdam, where AfD representatives met with neo-Nazis and others. We actually had an opportunity to speak with somebody from Correctiv, who was part of the investigative team that broke that story. And one of the questions that came up, obviously, was how they verified the story. And one of the things that he said was that when they followed up with people who were present there, they did not deny reports of what was discussed. But we hadn't heard yet that the meeting was taped. As a matter of fact, we've also gotten some comments from people that this is sort of a conspiracy theory and not to be believed. As a journalist who's following this story as well, what was the Tagesspiegel's coverage of this meeting like, and how did you verify the reporting from Correctiv?
Actually, I have to admit, I have no new insights of that. We could not, I think, independently verify what was said in the meeting because we don't have any informants there or tapes or something like this. So all we did was to inform our readers about what Correctiv reported about this meeting. And I think some of our experts, if I remember that correctly, some of our experts said that their sources confirmed basically what was said. There's one indication that, for example, a very close co-worker from Alice Weidel, the chairwoman of the AfD, were instantaneously fired by her for attending this meeting. So this was some kind of, not proof, but an indice that there might be some truth in it. But I don't think we have independently confirmed.
Yeah.
meeting.
So let's come back to sort of the evolution of the political landscape. I mean, obviously we're talking about the popularity of the AfD. You were talking a little bit about the Linkspartei, the Left Party, which has sort of disbanded itself in the parliament. In the meantime, there's also been the creation of a new left party around Sarah Wagenknecht, Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, actually a party that carries her name,
Yes,
which is not common. But there's also a new party called the DAWA Party, the Demokratische Allianz für Vielfalt und Aufbruch, right? The Democratic
yes,
Alliance for Diversity and Change is maybe the
yes.
best translation of that. And this is a group that was just created in January and is planning to be present in the European election in 24, and then also in the federal elections in the fall of 2025. Um, can you talk to us, A, about this DAWA party, but also what these new parties mean for German politics moving forward?
Yes, and there's another party, the Werteunion. Hans-Georg Maaßen, the
Yes.
former head of the Verfassungsschutz, is trying to make his
On the
own
right.
parties
Yeah.
on the right. Yes,
Yeah.
right from the CDU, but not as far right as the AfD, whatever that means in practical terms. DAWA is a very interesting party because basically it's from Turks to Turks, Turkish voters. Um, we have 3 million people of Turkish heritage in Germany. Half of them have German nationality. The other half has not. So
Hmm.
basically, you have huge numbers. 13.4%, no, million people living in Germany don't have the citizenship. So that's why, for example, the Ampel coalition make this law that I was talking about. Coming back to DAWA, DAWA is trying to point out our topics are discrimination against foreigners, against Muslims, against people of Turkish origin, fighting against discrimination, and bringing discriminative actions, either if you're looking for a job or for a flat, for an apartment, or for housing and so on, to light and
Hmm.
to fight against them. It's the biography of the four founders, who are all of Turkish descent, points very strongly towards a closeness to the AKP, the party of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the president of Turkey. So many people in Germany are afraid that this will be the long arm of Erdogan in Germany when he can influence German politics with this new DAWA party.
Hmm.
I'm a bit more open to new parties, and my personal opinion is let them try to convince as many people as you can that you have the right policy as any kind of other policy too. I mean, we have curious parties in Germany, in Schleswig-Holstein, the Bundesstaat in the north. There's the so-called SSW, the Südschleswigsche Wählerverband. It's basically a party of people from Danish
Hmm.
heritage from the north, and they are even not bound to the 5% hurdle. So they have a given seat in the Schleswig-Holstein parliament, and it's often the Zünglein an der Waage, how you say it, the yes,
Yeah. Sort of.
the most important thing to form a coalition.
Yeah.
I,
Sort of.
I
Sort of.
think I think Germany is used to, first of all, two-party politics, then three-party with the FDP, then with the Greens, then after unification with the so-called the Left Party, and so on. It's basically not uncommon if you see European realities. Take
Hmm.
countries like Spain or Italy or even Nordic countries. Many of them have 5 or 6 parties in parliament, and it makes it, I mean, it makes politics, I think, less ideological because parties are forced to find compromises and working together. If you have to form a coalition out of two, it's quite easy. Out of three, it's more complicated, as we see right now in the Ampel coalition. With 4 or 5 members, you are close to Israeli situations where it's always difficult to find a coalition and you have to make a lot of compromises.
Hmm.
A To be forced to make a lot of compromises makes you less ideological driven, I would say.
I mean, I think that one of the concerns is just sort of the fragmentation of the political landscape through all of these small parties. And as we're seeing with the three-party coalition government right now, it's harder to lead, it's harder to govern
Right.
when you have multiple parties in the mix, right? So
Yes.
there are some concerns about the fragmentation
Yes,
of the
in Germany,
party
always the
lines.
topic Weimar is at hand. I mean, if you talk about too many parties, the topic of Weimar, but I think the situation today with the unemployment about 5% and not a very strong economy, but not doing so badly, and so on and so on. The differences are a lot to Weimar.
Yeah.
If that is the only similarity that you have more parties than before, so be it.
Yeah. I mean, related to this, one of our viewers just wrote in asking, what about the Freie Wählergemeinschaften, the free voter groups? Do you think that they'll start to have a larger influence?
Free voter groups are they were very strong in Bavaria. In the last election in Bavaria, very, very strong. And they are always strong where, for example, in Bavaria, where the CSU was governing for decades with a strong majority in parliament. What to do if you're a conservative, but you're not satisfied with the CSU? You never vote for the SPD or the Greens or the FDP, so the only thing you can do is for the Freie Wähler. I don't see that the Freie Wähler are they strong in Bremen as well for the opposite reasons. There you have social democrats who used to vote for social democrats for decades and would never in their whole life vote conservative. So that's what they drive them to the Freie Wähler. So when you always have this kind of special political situation that a strong tradition drives you to one party, but right now you're frustrated with that party and would never vote for the opposition, then you go to the Freie Wähler.
Hmm.
I
So,
would not even call them right or left. They are just free and try to, we are the voice of the people, something like that.
coming back to Dava, this new Turkish party, one of the headlines that I saw this morning was sort of asking the question of whether this is or can be seen as sort of a Turkish AFD in terms of how conservative it is. And you talked a little bit about it being sort of an extension of Erdogan's party into Germany. Do you see this as a very conservative Turkish movement?
Yes, yes. They are conservative, um, for example, the cultural level, strongly against LGBTQ, against the marriage, same-sex marriage, against all these things. Um, so in these terms, they are very, very close to the AfD. In cultural terms, very close to the AfD. In fact, there are some rumors saying the AfD tried to connect to Dava. But what the AfD, on the other hand, is strongly against foreigners and very much anti-Islam. So how do you combine this? Well, it's a very open question. I don't think that the whole that the commonality being culturally conservative is strong enough to overcome the objections against being anti-foreigners.
Hmm. I mean, that is sort of interesting and almost ironic, right? That there's some alliance between the AfD and DAVA, but there's
Yes,
also
yes,
some just fundamental differences in terms of how the AfD would react to people
right.
with Migrationshintergrund, and who have come to Germany and settled in Germany.
But you have on the, I mean, nationalists or right-wing nationalists, they have something more in common than you think. I mean, we had this close relationship between former President Trump and Orban in Hungary, and Netanyahu in Israel, and so on. And then even his admiration of Putin. Sometimes some people said
Mhm.
it was stemming from cultural conservatism, strongman, autocratic manners, and things like this. So it's not so uncommon that on a certain kind of level, people who seem to have nothing in common try to close ranks.
Mhm. So coming back to one of the other headlines that you mentioned, you talked about the Süddeutsche headline over the weekend about the union between the Christian Democrats and the Christian Social Union duping the Ampel or the Traffic Light Coalition. So the two main opposition parties, or the main opposition group, the CDU, CSU, making life difficult for the Traffic Light Coalition. And this comes, of course, on the heels of some real tension between Friedrich Merz, the head of the CDU, and Olaf Scholz, the chancellor, that actually sort of included some name calling, if you will, over the course of last week. Can you talk a little bit about how the union is duping the government and about the tensions between Merz and Scholz and how those are playing out right now?
There is no love lost between Merz and Scholz, as you could see in the last general election, which was the first one in this year. And it was an uncommon fiery speech of the chancellor, naming Merz by name and calling him Callas, all these kind of names, very, very strong. Sometimes I would even say an aggressive speech, applauded
Hmm.
by his own people who sometimes lament that the chancellor is too weak and too neutral in his political speeches. So that was a very aggressive, strong speech against the coalition and against working because Olaf Scholz, I think it's almost half a year ago, tried to offer the kind of bridge. Let's work together on some topics and things like that. And I would say that Merz basically rejected this offer.
Hmm.
And this makes Olaf Scholz very angry. And because, for example, in terms of migration, economy, the debt question, should there be a limit, the Schuldenobergrenze, a limit about how much debt you can have and make?
The debt
So, and
brake.
all the debt rank get right. So they are on his own in in Parliament, but then you have the other house. That's the
Hmm.
Bundesrat, and there is a kind of majority of union minister president and prime ministers of certain states who can block what was decided upon in the Bundestag. And that's
Hmm.
the game they're playing right now. I mean, you're familiar with these things in Congress
Right.
about the budget. It's basically the same, not with the same kind of aggressiveness and uncompromising behavior as in the United States, but with a lot of similarities, I would argue.
Well,
So
and so
this is
related to that, I mean, one of the big pieces of news last week was that there was finally agreement on the 2024 budget, which had been called into question. And so this is actually, one positive sign amid a lot of
yeah.
sort of turbulence, if you will. After the turbulence related to the 2023 and the 2024 budgets after the decision by the Constitutional Court, do you feel like things are now starting to even out for the governing coalition and that they can move forward with now that they have a 2024 budget in place?
It's a good question. My gut feeling says yes, it will be leveled out because the main difference between Germany and the United States, I would say, concerning Congress or Bundestag behavior, the behavior of parties is that the opposition in Germany is afraid that it was called to you're just making opposition because you're the opposition. This is
Hmm.
something nobody wants to hear. And this might be different to what Republicans are used to. Yes, yes, sure, we are opposition. So in Germany, it's something else. It's something that yet you're playing politics. If
Hmm.
you are not doing things for the country and not doing things that are right and making compromises over the political spheres. So this
Hmm.
is what people are demanding in Germany, and this is how parties are measured in elections and voted upon. So parties are afraid to play games and make just politics in Germany.
Hmm. So I have two viewer questions that come back to the proliferation of parties in Germany and sort of the fragmentation of the political landscape, and then we can move on to some other topics. One person is curious what your sense is of um, how future governments will be able to work together, right? What level of cohesion will there be for future governments, and how could this impact political decision making? Another person is curious to know how the average voter can make sure that they're informed and understand what the parties stand for when the time comes for them to vote in the European parliamentary elections in June.
That is a very good. I will start with the second question because it's very interesting. I would argue that it's basically decided upon people, politicians' behavior. So Sarah Wagenknecht, as they call Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, she is a well-known figure from talk shows and from things like that. What exactly is the program of her BSW party? I think very few people know. They are voting for her because they like her. They like her arguments. They like her talkings, her look whatsoever. And I think this is a much bigger argument in the decisive vote than the programs. I mean, can you really tell what the difference is between the Social Democrats and the Christian Democratic Union? Some people can, not all can. So even on this level, it's more or less decided upon the leading figures in politics. Coming to the first question, how to make politics with so many parties in the parliament? I think it depends on what kind of parties. We have the so-called Brandmauer, the firewall between the Christian Democratic Union and, for example, the AfD, a promise the Christian Democratic Union gave
Yeah.
that they will never in any way work together with the AfD. There might be firewalls against the BSW and the Werteunion party of Hans-Georg Maaßen. So we had in very difficult times. For example, migrant crisis 2015, Corona crisis the last 3 years, Ukraine. We had a overwhelming parliamentary majority in favor of the given politics that was decided upon. No fight about
Hmm.
this, basically. So that gives me the hope or the optimism that things, even with more parties in parliament, if they are not part of the coalition or
Hmm.
of the government, it might still be possible to govern the country.
Hmm. And yet, all of this is happening sort of against a backdrop of disenchantment, if you will. I mean, one of the other, big news stories this morning on Deutschlandradio was the announcement of more strikes at airports. And of course, Germany has been plagued in the last few months by strikes at Deutsche Bahn, strikes at airports, and then protests by farmers, all of which have sort of messed up infrastructure and travel and transportation, but really get at the fact that there are a lot of people who are feeling out of sorts and off kilter at the state of the German economy and at the benefits that they have.
The good thing
Eh,
is we're still not France if it comes to strikes. So the strikes are harsh. Um, uh, unused for a lot of Germans in this kind of duration that they had. But still, I don't see any strike that lasts longer than, let's say, 4 or 6 weeks.
Hmm.
It's always quite reliable what the end will be. So yes, the German economy is not in a good shape. Infrastructure is not good, and you have all the global turmoils in the Gulf area with all the bombardments from the Houthi rebels and so on. For example, the Tesla company has to shut down for 2 weeks now every kind of production because of problems for goods to come in. So, but on the other hand, with 5% unemployment, we are used
Hmm.
to so much worse numbers. Social Democrat, when Gerhard Schröder was the chancellor, he was voted out of because of unemployment. 5% is doable, and we don't have regions where you really have
Hmm.
social problems because of the economy.
Yeah.
So I'm a little bit more optimistic than the actual figures are about how this will play out.
Yeah. Understood. And I think it's important, to put things in perspective, as you have. So in the last few minutes that we have left, let's turn to some foreign policy issues or questions. Obviously, coming back to the FAZ, the Frankfurter Allgemeine headline that you showed about how the statement was, "This is not how we can deter Russia." Obviously, Russia has been in the press over the last few days, and there have been some real concerns about Germany's ability to really sort of push back against Putin and against Russia at the moment, especially given that things are not going as well in Ukraine as many people had hoped. Can you talk a little bit about Germany's current relationship with Russia and how Russia is perceived?
Yes, this will be maybe one of the most important topics the chancellor will talk about with your president Joe Biden when he comes this week to Washington D.C. It's its third visit in the White House since he is chancellor. He will go on Thursday and I think meet Biden on Friday. And I think he is seen by the U.S. president as the strong man in Europe if it comes to confronting Ukraine, because the biggest fear in Germany and maybe in Europe is what to do with all the politics when we have a Donald Trump being the president. Will that stop any kind of financial aid or military aid and things like that? So who will replace America if it has to be replaced
Hmm.
and it becomes worse to worse? Then I think most would agree the only country that can do it is Germany, and that makes Olaf Scholz be now in the spotlight of international developments. He is, on the other hand, seen, I think, by Biden as a reliable partner if it comes to the Middle East, because of moral and historical terms, Germany is the European country that is on Israel's side in every kind of instance. And this is against a lot of European countries who are in strong favor of the Palestinian side,
Hmm.
especially right now with all the sufferings in the Gaza Strip. So I think this brings now Olaf Scholz maybe much more in the spotlight than he likes to be the strong man who has to convince European partners not to stop military and financial aid to Ukraine, but to increase aid. And that was, for example, his role in the last Gipfel of the European Union
Yeah, the last
and
summer.
the last summit of the European Union. And I think many people expects from him to play this role. On the other hand, the state of the German military is not in a good shape. Germany alone, even with the NATO, but without the US,
Hmm.
it might be very, very hard for Germany and Europe to combat Russia. The good news, if there is any kind of good news in this conflict, is that Russia, the 2-year conflict and the Russian occupation of parts of Ukraine and the aggression against Ukraine diminished the Russian military to a certain extent. I think, let's say, at least in 3 or 5 years, they can rebuild a lot of material that was demolished. That gives
Mhm.
us some breathing space in between. But this is a very limited amount of time.
I mean, Malte, of course, there's another element to this where there's concern on both sides of the Atlantic about waning public support for support of Ukraine. And one of our viewers is curious to know how much popular support there is in Germany for continued support of Ukraine right now, or if it's called into question as well.
It is called into question. It is waning. There is still a majority of Germans uh, supporting Ukraine and give financial aids. But it's a very strong topic. For example, in the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, in all these new parties who say, stop doing this. Try to
Hmm.
find a compromise with Russia, even if that means to give him some parts of the Ukraine, Crimean, Eastern Ukraine, and things like that. It is just too expensive. German money for Germans first. I mean, you all know these paroles from the United States, but I would not say it's the majority. It's the majority is still supporting the government, but yes, I mean it's the second year. We're now almost in February 24. So yeah, it's a while now.
So as we sort of come to an end of our Kaffeepause today, you did talk a little bit about Chancellor Scholz's upcoming trip to Washington, D.C. later this week, and obviously Russia, Ukraine, but also Gaza are bound to be at the top of the agenda. But from a German perspective, what are the expectations of this trip to Washington?
I would say the expectations do these two political figures find a way out of the mess we're in? I mean, is there a perspective, for example, for Palestinian statehood, for ending the Gaza conflict, for the Middle East, the re-emergence of the Abraham Accord with Saudi Arabia, and so on and so on? Is there any chance to do it, and how can Germany help to do it? Is there a common way that they have to find out of the Ukrainian mess? What to do? I mean,
Hmm.
saying it takes as long as it takes, and we will have the longest duration that we can have. It sounds more and more not so convincingly about if you see the last year, the so-called spring offensive that would reconquer all these places, that didn't happen. I mean, it's stalemate on the ground. But what you do with the conflict that is stalemate on the ground, and has the president of the United States any kind of vision how this ends, not just when indefinitely that some kind of support, but how. So that's the expectations I think the German side has to let's hear his vision for Ukraine, for Russia, and let's hear his vision for the Middle East. And these are very, very difficult to solve problems. I mean,
Hmm.
this is tough.
So Malte, as you sort of look ahead to the week ahead, what would you encourage our viewers and our listeners to look out for? Obviously, there are lots of topics to follow and to watch, but what would you encourage people to pay attention to?
Taylor Swift at the Super Bowl.
Okay.
Will she marry him or not? I mean, she will not endorse the president, but the marriage question is on everybody's mind. No, I think the hottest topic in political terms is the visit of the chancellor to DC.
Hmm.
And I think all the media in Germany will follow this very, very closely. And about the role, is there kind of new special relationship between the United States and Germany in terms of yes, two strong partners, or it's a combination of two partners that both of them have no clue about how to deal with the future.
Well, Malte, herzlichen Dank. It is always
Thank you for
wonderful
having
to
me.
talk to you, and I really appreciate your sharing your thoughts and your insights with all of us. This has been a great discussion. Many, many thanks.